I'm sure that many of those ideas and other ideas will come up in our next panel, which I'm very excited to introduce now. My enviable task here is just to introduce the chair of the next panel, Stephen Connelly, who will be well known to many of you. He is, of course, Director of Global Ed Services and was previously President of the International Education Association of Australia. And of course, his most notable role to date as my former boss. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ailsa. I had forgotten that. Welcome everybody to this session of the 2020 International Education Climate Action Summit. I'd like to thank the event sponsors and partners for helping to make the summit possible. This afternoon's session is called Pressing the Reset Button, COVID-19 as an Opportunity to Transition International Education to a More Sustainable Future. I believe we are one of the last things standing or sitting between our virtual audience and virtual drinks, so I'll not waste time on lengthy introductory remarks. Before I briefly introduce our panelists to you, however, I'd like to just activate our virtual audience for this final session, and we're going to run a brief poll, which will appear on your screens shortly. Hopefully, I will be able to see it. There it is. Okay, so for the benefit of the recording, the question we're asking is, what will be the shape of global higher education in 10 years? And respondents are able to select up to 3 options. So again, for the benefit of the recording, and whilst the audience is selecting their options, I'm just going to read briefly the options. Students will have a greater say over the design of their course. The physical location of a course will be less relevant. The physical location of a course will be more relevant. Institutional track record on sustainability will have a greater impact on student choice of where to study. Once the pandemic crisis is over, global higher education will slowly return to normal. Competition for fee-paying international students will be as intense as it is today. The coronavirus impact on international travel will speed up adoption of sustainable practices. Virtual study abroad will cater for more students than those who travel overseas for short-term study experiences. Institutions will invest more in internationalization at home, and transnational arrangements will become more attractive to international students. So I'll just wait a few seconds for that poll to finish. And Petulia, whenever you are ready, we can close that poll, and hopefully I will be able to see the results. And there they are, the results are in. So very interesting. The number one option in response to the question, what will be the shape of global higher education in 10 years? 65% of respondents indicated that students will have a greater say over the design of their course, what modules and whether to study them on campus or online. In second place, if I look down very quickly, 50% of respondents indicated that institutional track record on sustainability will have a greater impact on student choice of where to study, closely followed by, in third place, the coronavirus impact on international travel will speed up adoption of sustainable practices. So some very optimistic responses from our respondents there. Thank you very much for that. So as I said, this session is entitled Pressing the Reset Button, COVID-19 as an Opportunity to Transition International Education to a More Sustainable Future. Our presenters are, in order, Rebecca Hall, who is Global Lead for International Education at Austrade, Brett Berquist, International Director at the University of Auckland, and Corey Peterson, who is the President of the Australasian Campuses Towards Sustainability, but also has a day job as University Sustainability Manager at the University of Tasmania. So Rebecca, Brett and Corey will consider the broad issues of leadership and driving change across the sector, and if we're very lucky, we may be able to get them to do some crystal ball gazing to tell us what the future might look like from a sustainability perspective. Yeah, in fact, I have a crystal ball here for exactly that purpose, so we might be using that later. Each speaker will present for no more than 7 minutes, and at about the 5-minute mark, I'll ring the bell. Lots of props here. so that speakers will know how much time they have left. Audience members, you can post questions in the Q&A channel or comments in the chat channel. I'll monitor both of those, and as each speaker finishes, if there are relevant questions, I might pose one or two, and then we'll have a few minutes for further Q&A at the end of the session with a hard close at around 2:50 p.m. And so to our first speaker, Rebecca Hall from Austrade. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks a lot, Stephen, and great to be part of this virtual panel today. I'm going to try and share my screen. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I'm putting my timer on as well, so I don't run out of time. But did we ever think in a matter of months, our collective global efforts to contain COVID-19 and the resulting economic slowdown have, at least for the moment, reduced humanity's ecological footprint, something that many of us have been aspiring for and working to. And I think an interesting comparison is in both COVID-19 and in climate change. It is the world's most poorest and vulnerable who suffer the most. And so I think the challenge that you've set us today to talk about pressing the reset button gives us an opportunity to look at that from both lenses and also what that means for us inside our specific countries, but also globally. So I'm going to focus on two questions today. What does pressing the reset button look like at a macro, and apply it to build a more sustainable education experience? And in doing so, I'll draw on my role as Austrade's global lead for international education, but also as a trainee of the Climate Reality Leadership Program as well. So we know many governments have taken some decisive action, some might have said drastic at the time, to manage the spread of COVID. And I think at a macro level, we have a window of opportunity to make some of those changes stick and to craft policy that will enable us to transition to a fairer and more ecologically sustainable system. And you might ask, why am I sharing this in this presentation? Hopefully you can see my next slide. I'm sharing this because this isn't just about the movement of students or our institutions. This is about how we structure our economy, our societies, and what we value. And I'm including a quote here from the chairman of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, noting that we have a phenomenal opportunity to address two issues at once: decarbonise the economy as a long-term game, but also to do so in a way that creates significant jobs, and of course, as you would expect in his line of business, look at energy and how individual countries may be able to use that as their next superpower. I would actually suggest that Australia and the world has another valuable renewable energy, and that's international education. Our graduates are and can power the world. And so resetting following COVID, I think, can also enable us to make bold choices in setting the right policy and the right funding environment that can lead to a more sustainable international education sector. On the next slide, I want to just share what we're seeing here in Australia in terms of the 4 factors that we think will shape Australia's international education. And I'm just sharing them here for context because I think we can't move to the what's next without dealing with what's right here in front of us. So again, quite macro level here, obviously for us in Australia, how we progress along the 3-step roadmap towards a COVID-safe Australia will ultimately determine what's next in the short term for our institutions and for students. But of course also how well our source countries and or competitors recover, health, economic, politically, will obviously also impact those who may want to continue studying and prospective students and partners. I heard some earlier presentations, of course. Another key factor is how our student and parent buyer behaviours might change during this time. And I think there are a lot of correlations that we've seen in terms of students' perceptions on climate change, also on how we're managing COVID and how a society places value on certain aspects. And then finally, for many of us who are still managing large cohorts of international students with us during the crisis, how those students experience their education, whether they're with us or whether they're online, and what that means for our branding and reputation. So I'm going to turn now to, I guess, the second question. What can we take from the global response in COVID and apply it to building a more sustainable international education sector? And I want to focus on 5 critical resets. And I haven't got a slide for these because I've actually been changing them as I go and think about this as well, because I was trying to also make sure that this doesn't just apply to Australian education, but is also relevant for those in other destinations. So the 5 critical resets, I'll start with number 1. And number 1 is, and I think as our previous speaker just noted, we've actually shown we can travel less and deliver more value through better integrated planning, recruitment activities, partnership activities. In Australia, that's really important given how far away we are from the world, but also how many agencies and organisations are involved in the promotion of international education. This is a great opportunity for us to actually meet the climate action need, but also deliver greater value to our students and to meet a need for our institutions. As a destination agency, we know our institutions will have less resources, more work, less people, and so how we can actually support that through better coordination and engagement. I think that's critical and something that quite well here in Australia. I'll go to the next slide and just build on what our colleagues from Education New Zealand shared as well, that this is a chance for us to obviously transform the way that we run our traditional events, the way that we recruit, the way that we share our insights and connect with student audiences. So I've just included here some of the priority actions and pivots that Austrade has been leading on behalf of the sector during COVID, and what that might mean as we move forward. And with many of these, including our Study with Australia initiative, actually contributing to a more sustainable sector. So the second reset, I think, is, and I mentioned it earlier, but I need to call it out again, focusing on revised governance models and funding models for our institutions. This has shone a light, COVID has shone a light on the reliance of many of our institutions on international education, and this is a chance to have a serious conversation about that. Stephen's told me time, and you know I'm only up to my second point, so I'm going to close really quickly, Stephen. The third reset, I think, is the cloud becomes our biggest campus and our most effective channel to share knowledge. And it's not an either or, it's actually an enabler, and we've shown we can do it, and I hope we continue to do it. Number 4, we actually are going to we need to produce new and different kinds of graduates who have the skills that we need to address the new world that we want to create. And I think we've shown how quickly we can move with product development during COVID, and I can't wait to see what more we can do. Finally, number 5, we have shown by our decisions, by the changes we've made in governance, in finance, in political risk and appetite, we have the ability to react quickly to a crisis. And I'd love to see that we make this not by design, not by disaster, but by design.
That's terrific, Rebecca. Thank you very much. And a wonderful moment there when my message to you appeared on everybody's screen that you had run out of time. So that's one of the records. We'll just go, Thompson Chung has actually sent through some excellent questions, but they're general and of relevance to all the panelists, I think. So I'm going to leave them to the end and just ask Brett Berquist to jump in and give us his presentation. Brett, over to you.
So really nice to be with you all today. I think I'm here for the institutional perspective of it all. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what my institution is doing and why this all matters to us. And then I'm going to pull it down to a very pragmatic, rubber hits the road. What does it mean for an international educator who is basically in charge of delivering recruitment KPIs? How do we reconcile those two things? When I moved to New Zealand a few years ago from Michigan, I had been commuting 350 kilometers per day from my office. It was complicated, change jobs, kids in school, that sort of thing. So I got down to New Zealand and I rented a place near my office in the CBD. I walked through a park to my office, no car, working on my carbon karma. Then I started traveling for work and I went, oh my God, I'm going to be in purgatory forever. I mean, you know, down this part of the world, we define our work trips by how many sleeps. You know, I used to think a trip from New York to Europe was a long one. That's nothing here, you know, so just the sheer scope of what we're trying to achieve and how we do that means that climate action is a really important part of international education. At my institution, we're the flagship university of New Zealand. We have 8 really wonderful institutions in New Zealand. The University of Auckland is a little bit bigger with about 45,000 students. Of those, nearly 9,000 are international students, and 1 in 4 of our undergraduates does study abroad during their studies. So international education is a pretty big deal, big part of what we do. And we've been focusing a lot on SDGs, particularly in how we report on them in the different ranking systems that are coming forward. We were really pleased to be #1 in the world in the Times Higher Global Impact ranking when it first came out in 2019. About half of the market was in. And we were really worried this year when we saw all of the market come in, but we retained our #1 ranking, largely because we do very well on number 17, where we have a lot of partnerships for international education. And it was cool to see the dominance of down under institutions in this year's rankings on the SDGs. But also at the same time, many of us, just like Auckland, Elsa always points this out. Whenever I crow about our SDG ranking, I can hear Elsa Lamont's voice in my head saying, yes, but what about number 13? Because we didn't submit in 2019, we didn't submit in 2020, but we're going to submit in 2021, just to know where we are. And I think that's the case for a lot of institutions down under. Several of the other New Zealand universities did pretty well, and Australian ones, but it's increasingly important. But we want to talk about what does that mean for an office which is in charge of the traditional things an international office is? What impact does this have on recruitment? Does it really matter? You know, are all of our markets inspired by Greta Thunberg, or is it only some of them? Is that something that's temporary? Is it going to go away, or is it here to stay? What do we need to be doing with that? Well, so what we thought was there's so many parts of this that are beyond the control of the international office. So why don't we start close to home, get our house in order, take a look at what we're doing. Let's start by counting. Who knew it would be so difficult for me to figure out just how much my team flew last year? It took us 6 months, actually, but we had someone come in. There's a brand you might recognize, a certain consultant who happens to be the organizer of this summit, came in and took a look at what we were doing, gave us a scorecard. I wasn't happy with all of the grades she was giving me, but anyway, kind of told us where we were lacking, where we needed to focus, and then gave us a series of recommendations. And she was able to come up with the count of exactly how far we flew and the mega amount of carbon emissions that related to that. So concretely, what are we doing here? Really, we're focusing on things that have been coming up during the previous talks, right? So virtual recruitment, that's here to stay. We're all in the middle of it right now. This is what our days look like all day long. So we're investing a lot in that area. We had already been working on some ways to reduce the amount of printing we're doing and shipping, you know, more customized digital printing. Something a little bit more original is we're looking at some options for giving a gift, you know, giving someone a certificate that we planted trees for them instead of giving them our stuffed kiwi like we usually do. We've also been increasing our offshore staffing, having people closer to those markets who aren't getting on a plane from New Zealand to service some of our agents in Beijing, for example, is not only more cost effective, but also helps our carbon footprint quite a bit. And then, of course, we're looking at the traditional offsetting options. You heard Massey talk about the steps that they're taking after the fact. We also believe that the more noble road is to inset these things. But in the meantime, you got to start somewhere. So we actually now finally have a report with a price tag, which allows me to make some decisions for offsetting all of my international office travel. Right now, that's going to cost me $0, a pretty easy decision, but I have committed budget to do that going forward. We're also going to be offsetting our outbound student travel and trying to put in place a way to make it easy for our inbound students to opt in at their cost to offset their travel on their way to New Zealand. And we actually think that's a really interesting space for ENZ and the rest of our colleagues in New Zealand to be. And finally, we're educating a lot. We're doing some programming around Generation Climate Action to really get our students who are here, the study abroad students we host, and our outbound students to focus on that and to think about where they want to be in that space. So it's a lot of things we're doing, a lot of things to think about, but we really feel that this is going to become increasingly important in our ability to deliver our KPIs. And that is bringing international students in, facilitating mobility of our international students, and then educating our stakeholders overall. So with that, I really focused not so much on the philosophical side or crystal ball of the future. I've tried to bring some very concrete steps. What does it mean where the rubber hits the road for someone who manages a significant team, significant budget, delivering KPIs? How do we get our head around this? And I hope that's useful for others. Thanks.
Straight to Corey. We've had another excellent question come in from Sue Ganapati, but again, I'm going to leave the questions, they're quite wordy, to the end because I think there's a general application for our panelists. Corey.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazing session. I'm learning a lot just listening, and then the sessions before this have been fantastic. I'm just trying to get my screen to share. You can see the first slide. What is sustainability? Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to step back to basics very quickly, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but there is a method in my madness. Sustainability has a lot of definitions to it. I know we're talking about climate action, and you've heard from Rebecca and Brett as well that there's an understanding that you know, climate action is nothing without a further and broader understanding of sustainability, from climate justice through to environmental outcomes in what universities do, whether that's student travel or staff travel, as Brett was just discussing. And Brett, I'm from Minnesota, so I ended up in Tasmania and you ended up in New Zealand. Quite interesting. And what I want to point out here is you often see a Venn diagram that equates environment, culture, or social and economy, and sustainability is what's in the center of that. And in fact, if I can get my slide to work properly, the reality of the situation, as we know through this COVID epidemic, the wave concept, and you see some of the memes out there where the big wave is climate change behind COVID and a second wave of COVID. So this is a better model, and it's what I always discuss with people, and I always disabuse them of the notion of a Venn diagram, that in fact you don't have an economy unless you have a society, and you don't have a society unless you have a stable environment. So it's really important context in our discussions today that what we're talking about is ensuring that that green circle has some level of stability or normality to it that we can count on, so that we can have stable societies and therefore have stable economies that allow students to travel around the world and staff to travel around the world as well. You've heard a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals today. To bring that model, this is from the Stockholm University Institute Resilience Center at their university. And that just puts some context around those SDGs. We often see them all 17 sort of listed together, but it's really an important point to make, that the goals have layers to them as well that match up with that nested diagram that I showed you. And climate action is obviously number 13 there in the green, and that is at the very base level of what we need to care about. That's why this climate action network is so important, because at the end of the day, without a stable climate, we're going to have a hard time maintaining any stability in anything else we do. So why do we address sustainability in the university sector, or anywhere for that matter? A lot of it is stakeholder expectations, which I'll delve into in a little bit more there, but reputation and attractiveness, which ties into the former thing around expectations, but there's cost imperatives too. Flying is not cheap. Getting students here and housing students is not cheap. We have long-term viability issues. You know, we are not-for-profit technically institutions, and therefore, you know, we shouldn't, and most don't have a major profit motive other than ensuring our long-term viability. And then the emerging issues there, we have supply chains, Modern Slavery Act, social responsibility things. Climate emergency is what we're talking about today. Biodiversity loss is a big thing, and human health could come into that very much so right now. So we have a lot of stakeholders to integrate with our activities within the sector, but students are a major part of that. And I just want to reflect briefly on a survey the UK has been doing for quite some time, the National Union of Students, which is now Students of Sustainability. And they've been running an international survey for over 10 years. Over 50,000 students have participated, and over 80% expect universities to act on sustainability. And when they mean act on, they mean lead. So there's some expectations that our sector should be leading in responses, and I went the wrong way there. And then at the University of Tasmania, where I work, we have done 3 student and staff surveys. So we've had over 5,550 students. 89% expect us to maintain our certified carbon neutral status, which we've had since 2016. We're one of only 2 institutions in Australia to have that certified status for scopes 1, 2, and 3, and 80% support divestment. So there's a lot of pressure there to do some things. I'll just briefly touch on the University of Tasmania's emissions, and this is really important. To be certified, you have to do all of your scopes 1, 2, and 3, and I won't delve right into what those are at this point. But suffice it to say, scope 3 is a major component of what we do. And within that is a lot of that is air travel. And for our university based in Tasmania, we fly everywhere. We have no trains. The boats that we do have are very slow to get even to Melbourne. So air travel is 21% of our emissions portfolio, right up there with our electricity use. So it is a major issue for us around air travel. And then staff commuting. So transport's very big for us, and we've been focusing on that for some time, reducing it. We as a university, in order to maintain our carbon neutral certification, and everybody would have to do this, you can do everything you want to minimize your carbon emissions, but at the end of the day, you're going to have residual emissions, and you're going to need to offset those. And that is, you look at climate change globally, you look at carbon globally, and if you can reduce your emissions from somewhere on the planet, that counts globally is how we look at it. We try to value add in our activities and our offsets. So we target areas where we have international students, so we give back to those communities. We try to ensure that biodiversity is right up there. If we do anything around forests or plant-based things, biodiversity and community development need to be part of that and have certifications as well. We don't just buy trees, as it were. And then we support renewable energy. So there's a lot of things that we can do as a university and as a sector. So Australasian campuses towards sustainability. Every year we have a physical conference, except this year we were supposed to host it in Tasmania. And we always have a certified carbon neutral conference, meaning we do buy offsets where we can't reduce emissions. So there are things universities and organizations can and should be doing. And maybe I'll just leave it there, Stephen.
That's a lot of information packed into 21 minutes, thanks to all of our panelists. Now, we've had some questions come in, as I've said before, and I'm going to ask one of them to Rebecca and one to Brett at this stage. So Brett, just as a heads up, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to deal with the question posed by Sue Ganapati. I think you can see them. Rebecca, Thompson Chung has asked 3 questions. So well done, Thompson. I'm only going to ask one of them. And that's the 3rd question. His question is, would the panel be able to comment on political will and leadership in driving changes for a sustainable future? Now, I'd like you to apply that to international education, but I want to also put just a commentary around that. The Australian Government Roadmap to a COVID-safe Australia, which is on one of your slides, stage 3 mentions consider cross-Tasman, Pacific Island and international student travel, which is interesting. There might have been a lot of people sort of cheering that the Australian government was paying attention to student travel, but as a cynic, I think it also flags that the Australian government has no plans to alter its approach to higher education funding and therefore needs universities to rebound in terms of international student numbers. So that, I think, makes Thompson's interesting. Political will and leadership in driving change, Rebecca.
And that makes it a challenge for me, given obviously my role in government is with the trade, the Australian Trade Commission and focused on international education. But I will make two points on that. I do think Australia's National Cabinet and how we have approached managing during the crisis, so all state premiers as part of a national cabinet, actually is a welcome addition to how we govern in Australia. And that political will collectively of how our premiers and our ministers are working together is an opportunity that we want to make the most of. Now, I can see your face, Stephen, as well. It doesn't mean we agree on everything.
No, actually,
but
I think
it does mean there is an opportunity for us in that. Those 2 words, international students, being included in the COVID safe plan and the 3-point plan. Yes, very important, but also to note that that doesn't mean in July we are open and we have open borders. There is a long way to go, as everyone understands. So I think one of the challenges for international education at this time is not only political will, but community sentiment and how the community understands the value of international education. Because I think there is a lot more we need to do as a sector. We look at how the tourism sector is responded to or understood in terms of the need for support. And international education, certainly in this country, contributes a significant amount, and combined, those two sectors are our third largest sector. I spoke about energy in a purposeful way as well. They are our biggest renewable energy sectors at the moment in terms of that value. So I want to answer his second question quickly too, because alumni, absolutely. Our power is in our graduates, our impact is in our graduates, and alumni play a key role in helping shape that as well. So I'd love to see more strategies that involve alumni helping us and also doing that work back in their home countries as well.
Great, thanks Rebecca. And just for the benefit of people listening and the recording who can't see the questions, Thompson's second question was, do you see a role for international alumni as influencers within their respective areas, organisations beyond the international education sector? So a couple of excellent questions there from Thompson. Now, Sue Ganapati has also asked us a question. Although virtual platforms and interconnectedness have gained popularity and posed excellent opportunities, could this also adversely affect globalisation and increase behaviour barriers as government imposes country and state lockdowns and social distancing policies? So, Brett, you've had a couple of minutes to sit there and think about that. What are your views?
Does that mean I'm supposed to be more brilliant than Rebecca since I had 2 minutes?
Yes, unfortunately.
Oh, damn. Oh, that's a tough one. Hey, I think it's a really good question, actually. But I think the thing to focus on here is that none of this is new. So we were doing virtual platforms, virtual recruitment previously. We were already in the middle of looking at ways of limiting travel. This is a way to, on a positive day, you focus on the silver lining. This is a way to kind of leapfrog us forward in a direction that we were already undertaking. Now we're doing it out of necessity, out of pressure, not by choice. But in many ways, it just gives us a whole new impetus to what we were talking about before. Someone was saying, I think it was Rob Lawrence. No, Rob Lawrence quoting Rebecca Hall. Oh my God. We should be thinking about renewal, not recovery, right? That was you, Rebecca, I think. I didn't hear you say it, but someone, yeah, it was Rob Lawrence quoting Rebecca Hall. Renewal of the international education industry, not recovery. We're not going to go back to where we were. The things we're doing currently, we were doing previously. It just gives us a chance to really fast forward to where we might want to be. I think at the end of the day, some of the nationalist tensions we might be seeing, actually all that's simply going to strengthen the core values we have in international education. The things we care about, they're not going away, they're going to get stronger as a result of all this. And obviously the whole interconnectedness of the world is, if there's anyone on the planet who doesn't understand that now, where could they be, right? I think the difference though is that the means to achieve our ends are going to remain more diversified. I was pleased by the most popular response on the poll that Stephen put up at the beginning, right? More choices, more modules, including choice of location, more power in the consumer, more power in the student's hands, right? So I think isn't going to change things fundamentally. I guess maybe one of the biggest benefits I would see is that the stigma, people debate this, right? But fundamentally, you don't always have the same career outcomes with a fully online degree as you do in an in-person degree. Same thing for TNE, branch campus degrees versus at the location. And with the whole sector, 90% of students in the world going online for an extended period, many of our institutions will reset a bit, but retain much, much more activity in that space. And perhaps that will reduce the stigma that's there. And perhaps it will shift some of the economic differences we've seen. One of the conversations we've been having in New Zealand is if we were to reset the number of international education students, we would need to fundamentally revisit the funding model of our institutions. Now, of course, this is something the vice chancellors talk about a lot, but given the scope and the breadth of the focus on it because of the economic crisis, it's also a new opportunity to have that conversation around, who's funding and who should be funding higher education. So I think in that regard, there's a lot of benefits which will simply reinforce our core values, but diversify the means by which we reach them. How's
Great,
that?
thank you. And I've been given a couple more minutes. And Tony Smith has asked a really interesting question. So Corey, I don't know if you can gird your loins and give us an excellent 60 seconds in response to this. Tony's asked, some research has shown that the use of augmented reality and virtual reality in education can result in higher productivity and learning ability of students. It's said that such technologies help transform boring learning into an engaging and interactive process. Question is, do any of the organisations represented here, so UTAS or any others that you're aware of, Corey, use VR or AVR to deliver courses? And I guess the next question is, if so, how's it going?
We have at the University of Tasmania done some exploratory use of it. I don't know, I can't comment on how well it's gone. I'm pretty sure we haven't rolled it out broadly across our current response to the COVID activities. We generally have been using it to engage younger people in the idea of pursuing higher education rather than as a teaching tool into our current curriculum. Now that may be changing at this time. Yeah, so that's a very good question, and one that I think will come to the fore as Brett was discussing. We're going to have to come up with new ways of doing things while still understanding there's value in how we were doing it before.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. Can I just make some closing remarks in that case with 1 minute left on our time? Firstly, a big thank you to this session's presenters. 3 really excellent presentations, and as I said earlier, a lot of information packed into 21 minutes and given us a lot to think about and some perspective on possible futures. Just again, bouquets to the event sponsors and partners for helping to make the summit possible. To Zoom, I know we're only at the beginning of our new relationship, but you've very quickly become an important part of all our lives, and we love you. To the audience, thanks for Zooming in this afternoon and for your future efforts to tackle climate change issues in international education. And finally, to Ailsa Lamont, whose energy and commitment are the driving forces behind this summit. Congratulations, Ailsa. Good job, and back to you. Thank you.